this Sunday Coffee series, we're going to be talking about and summarizing step one, which is really understanding that diet culture is all about subtracting. And we talked about how subtraction feels familiar. We spent a lot of time really understanding that if you've dieted before or you've been surrounded by dieting, or even if you're new to diabetes and you're like, what do I do? You're really going to hear a lot about subtracting, taking away food, not eating certain foods, limiting. And this is, I think, well intending, but it has a really big consequence, which is turning around and reaching for the fastest approach to things, but actually not the most effective. So subtracting, just avoiding foods, is in fact takes the least amount of effort and it takes the least amount of thought, but ultimately it doesn't nourish the body. And that's problematic because if you're looking for a result and you said, okay, I'm just not going to eat bread, then you go, oh, well, I won't eat other things like rolls or crackers, and then I won't have potatoes or corn or peas, and then I won't have. And all of a sudden you realize the things you won't have is a very, very long list. And it becomes familiar to avoid and restrict. And ultimately, it doesn't help us understand what can I eat, what will nourish my body. So yes, it's fast, but no, it's not effective. And this is, I think, one of the rubs. People are looking for what's quick. And that pretty much is the antithesis of diet culture. What's quick? So again, we're going to circle back to this idea of the force of familiar. The force of familiar is the force that's always going to pull you back to what you've done. So if in the past you have limited, restricted, cut out, avoided foods, that force is going to say that's what's familiar, so that's what's normal. And this is really problematic because it makes us believe we're doing what's best for us. And in order to live a healthy life, we have to nourish our body. There's no argument about that. No one's saying that a nourished body is a bad thing. What people are really getting kind of heated about is how we go about nourishing the body. And there's a lot of people that are like a nourished body is a body that doesn't eat certain foods. And at no weight loss required, I don't believe that to be true. A nourished body is a body that has a wide variety of foods and is eating in a way that feels good in the body. And that's really an important distinction because if you're always subtracting, does it feel good? Does it feel pleasant? Is that enjoyable? Is that a behavior you want to keep doing? I know it feels familiar that it's right, but familiar is just a force pulling you back to what you've done. Does it feel effective? Do you feel that sense of self-care when you're always subtracting, when you're always limiting, when you're always restricting? Or do you kind of feel the weight and the shackles of dieting? When we step out of diet culture, when we start saying, wait a second, this subtraction doesn't work, I actually need to add foods to my diet. What do you add? I mean, everyone's talking about what you shouldn't eat. No one's talking about what would help you. So again, the question starts becoming, am I eating these foods because I find them enjoyable, or am I eating these foods because I should? And the shoulds are so familiar. And again, that force of familiar is going to pull you back to what you've done. And if what you've done is eaten what you feel like you should eat, not foods that you enjoy, gosh, we're back to diet culture again, aren't we? So we actually want to spend more time checking in, noticing what is pleasant, what's neutral, what's unpleasant. So here you are eating and you're turning around and saying like, I should eat these foods. Oh, wait. I get to eat these foods. Why do I get to eat these foods? Because I enjoy them. Now, lots of people say, Meager, if I did that, I would just eat like, junk. I would eat foods that have no nutrition. And I go, maybe, but maybe not do that. And this is part of this process if we are clear in our intention, which is a compassionate desire to nourish our body and nurture our body. Really trust that intention to turn around and say, wait a second, is it pleasant? Does it feel pleasant when I don't nourish my body, or does it feel pleasant when I nourish my body? Do I have more energy? Do I feel like I'm really caring for myself? And, I love a good cookie like anyone else does. And I am so down for things like pizza. But if that's all I eat, I don't actually feel like I have any energy. So now we want to start saying, well, what are the foods that if I added those foods to my diet, what would feel nourishing? What would nurture me? So in the series that we've been doing, I have posted the blood sugar rocket handout. And that's really kind of grouping foods. So foods without fiber, foods with fiber, foods with protein, low carbohydrate vegetables, and plant-based fats. And it's really helping you visually see how those could impact your blood sugars. And lots of people are like, oh, well, the foods without fiber, the carbohydrates without fiber, those are bad. I'm like, no, they're not bad. But I mean, they make my blood sugars go up the most. I'm like, yeah, they do. And if you were having a low blood sugar reaction, because you take a medication that can cause that, or you delayed eating, or you over-exercised, you would want to eat those high carbohydrate foods because they do raise your blood sugars quickly. And we talk about times where we want to have things like juice available or soda available because we're having a low blood sugar. Well, Migrat, I'm not taking medication that would make me have a low blood sugar, but I like those foods. Amen. I do too. So now we're turning around saying it isn't can't I have these foods, it's how. How can I incorporate these foods in my diet and still meet my goal of nourishing my body? How can I incorporate these foods in my diet and still meet the goal of balancing my blood sugars? It's a difference. There's no authority here. You're asking questions, and that's that compassionate curiosity, which, by the way, is the thing that breaks the force of familiar. I know. It's compassionate curiosity. Because the force of familiar, if we try to step into what's unfamiliar, our whole body goes like, oh, I don't want to do that. But if we pause and we say to ourselves, how can I do something that's unfamiliar? Well, you're curious about it. You're like, oh, I've never done that before. That sounds like so much fun. And all of a sudden, you're just excited to do something that you've never done before. That's compassionate curiosity. So how can I? Is compassionate curiosity. How can I do that? Are you going to get it right? Sometimes. Are you going to get it wrong? Sure, sometimes. We're human. Like, it's not about being perfect. It's about trying, and it's about noticing. So say you figured out like, oh, I want to have dessert foods, or I want to have something that's higher in carbohydrates. You're trying to turn around and say like, how could I balance that out in my diet? And I think the blood sugar rockets do a nice job of kind of helping us imagine doing that. So let me give you an example. We'll say Bob. I know how I love to pick on Bob. So say Bob's like, well, in the past, I didn't eat any carbohydrates when I had something like a burger. And I go, did you enjoy eating the burger? And Bob's like, no, not really. And I'm like, okay, so what would happen if you had a roll with that, had it on a roll? And Bob's like, I don't know that that's safe. And I go, are you willing to try? So Bob's like, well, I don't want to have it on like a white roll because I feel like that's just not going to work for me. Amen, Bob. I love it. What do you want to do? So Bob looks around and he finds a whole wheat roll that he tries. Great. So Bob's had a hamburger with about 30 grams of carbohydrate and about 6 grams of fiber. That's a great choice. Bob might turn around and say, can I have more than 30 grams of fiber? 30 grams of carbohydrate? I'm like, I don't know, Bob, can you? This is part of why we meet with a dietitian to kind of get an individual plan. Most people, though, when we talk about a reasonable amount of carbohydrates, if we're eating high fiber carbohydrates, so things like whole wheat and whole grain, if we're getting things like, like a potato where we're eating the skin, we generally talk about having somewhere between 45 and 75 grams of carbohydrate. And people are like, well, won't that make my blood sugars go up? I'm like, yeah, that's a normal response to carbohydrates. So there's no bad there. People are like, well, I heard that really spikes my blood sugars. Yeah. And I find that the word spike is really pejorative. So blood sugars go up and down. That's what happens. That's a normal response. Everyone has a normal response. Blood sugars go up and down. If you think for the rest of your life you never want to eat carbohydrates, that's A, not a balanced diet, and B, that is really kind of like punishment. Why would I do that? And the more we restrict, the more we're like to overeat the next time we're in the process of having carbohydrates. So, like, for example, if Bob is turning around saying, like, I'm afraid to eat 30 grams of carbohydrate, why? And it's because for a lot of people, 30 grams will actually wind up being 90 or 120 grams because then we stop caring. And this is really that binging that happens after we break our diet. And if we start giving ourselves permission to eat carbohydrates, then we're actually not breaking our diet. We're just eating a balanced diet. So let's go back to Bob and say Bob has the burger and has it on a bun. And he's like, oh, I'm still worried that this would make my blood sugars go up. And I go, fine. What else could you eat using that blood sugar rocket that might balance out your blood sugars? And Bob's looking at it, he's saying, oh, yeah, I getcha. Those plant-based fats, those low carbohydrate vegetables also really help my blood sugars. I go, yeah, they do. And actually having less saturated fats also help your blood sugars. So you might turn around and say, so what are you suggesting, Migrit? And I'm like, I don't know. Do you want to have maybe a turkey burger or a salmon burger? Because those are both going to be lower in saturated fats. So if having 30 grams of carbohydrates make your blood sugars go up, you could add a salad. You could add other vegetables. You could shift to lower saturated fat, burgers. And maybe those are turkey burgers, maybe they're salmon burgers, maybe they're a veggie burger. Again, it's something to experiment with and try and say what worked for me, what was a pleasant experience. There are lots of people out there that say, oh no, I don't want to eat those other kind of burgers. Amen. Don't eat them. You get to be the one making the decisions, not the diet. So let's say Bob eats the burger and he's like, my blood sugars didn't really go up that much. I go, great. He's like, I think it was because I used avocado instead of cheese. That's a great thing to learn, Bob. I'm so happy for you. So Bob's now getting really curious about adding carbohydrates. He's breaking the force of familiar of restriction, and he's starting to say, I would have never thought to add avocado. I would have never thought to select a whole grain bun. I would have never thought to have a side salad. I would have never thought to maybe do a turkey burger. Do you see how that compassionate curiosity is really letting Bob start imagining other ways to enjoy having a burger at a cookout? When we start adding foods to our diet, it really does require us to lean into some deeper questions. What do I like? What do I enjoy? What would make this eating experience pleasant? And you can see right away when you ask those questions, you're really centering on yourself. You're not centering on the diet. What am I allowed? What can I have? What's the right amount? You turn around saying, wait a second, I understand some foods make my blood sugars go up at a faster rate than others. That is a true sentence. There are foods that do that. And for Bob, he's not really sure what happens when he eats like carbohydrates from a bun. Amen. I don't know what happens when Bob eats carbohydrates from a roll. That's learning. We have to learn. We don't know. And it may affect Marcia very differently or Joe very differently. Amen. Like, I'm so happy that Marcia and Joe figured it out. But Bob, you need to take the time to figure it out. And that's scary. Because if we've always relied on the diet to tell us what to do, and the diet to tell us what's right for us, the force of familiar is going to pull you back to that belief. And so again, we're really stepping into our own agency and autonomy. Agency is you are bright and able. Autonomy is you have choice. So as we really understand this first step of the roadmap, we're adding foods back in, and adding foods back into our diet sounds very simple, but in reality, there's a lot of steps to that. Now, in the other posts that I've made, please recognize that I have one about adding foods to breakfast. I have one about lunch and dinner. We're all using that blood sugar rocket. And also we talk about permission, like what does it look like to give ourselves permission? What does it look like to overcome that force of familiar? So in the bottom, I'm just going to put links to all of those articles. So if you've missed them, you can go back and get them in kind of a coherent way. And to foreshadow into our next step, we are moving into step 2 of the roadmap. So the next step is we are really starting to recognize what does it look like to eat and to nourish our body without dieting. And that's going to be a lot to unpack because there's a lot about diabetes and diabetes prevention and kind of the mechanisms of diabetes, the pathophysiology, as we like to say in the biz. There's a lot about that we need to learn. And oftentimes dieting obscures that learning because we're so focused on restriction, we're actually not understanding how our body functions. Please join me. Take care, everyone. Bye.